because it's just a few minutes after the hour, but because we are in Switzerland and it is 2 minutes past the hour, I think we should probably begin. My name is Darcy Alexandra, and I'm very fortunate enough to know many of you here, but I think there's also some new faces, which is wonderful. And together with Stacey Stroily and Britta Kurtzi, we are the collective Democrats Abroad Zurich chapter leadership team. And we're delighted to welcome you all here this afternoon, this evening, this early autumn evening as I look outside. It's almost dark already. We're really excited to have this VP presidential debate download as an opportunity to come together and to share our thoughts and to inspire one another as well. And so we have an amazing lineup of people that are friends and people from within Democrats Abroad and people who have worked with Democrats Abroad or who are, for example, we have a community organizer with us tonight. We have an historian. So I am going to begin by reading, by sharing the bios that I have of people who are going to be speaking. What we'll do is we'll have 3 inputs, and then we'll have a moment for questions and answers from our members. And then we'll have 2 inputs and more questions and answers. We want to make sure that members have a chance to speak and to ask questions and not to overload it too much. So that is how we'll begin. And I'll start with our first input provider, our first expert, or person who will share her thoughts with us is Dr. Nicole M. Guidotti Hernandez. And Dr. Guidotti Hernandez is acting professor of English at Emory University. During the academic year 2019-2020, she was Harvard's Charles Warren Center Fellow for American History. She was a member of the UT faculty in Austin and the inaugural chair of the Department of Mexican American and Latino Studies. Her book, Unspeakable Violence, Remapping US and Mexican National Imaginaries, was a finalist for the 2012 Berkshire Women's History First Book Prize and won the MLA Chicana Chicano Latino Prize in Literary and Cultural Studies. I can attest that Nicole is not only a very talented historian, but a really beautiful writer. And so I highly recommend her books. As a public intellectual, Dr. Guidotti Hernandez has written numerous articles for Ms. Magazine and the feminist blog, The Feminist Wire. And she was just recently interviewed by Vogue Magazine. She covers topics such as immigration, immigrant rights, the DREAM Act, reproductive rights, and she is speaking with us today. Her time is 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so you're very welcome, Nicole. The floor is now yours.
I did a PowerPoint just because I thought it would be good to just think about where we've been and where we need to go, right? How do we move forward after this debate? I was really glad to see that this was not a dumpster fire on wheels floating in the middle of a hurricane, but there were definitely some fires going on. And, you know, I just think it's important to remember, right? Here we are, almost 40 years after Geraldine Ferraro was on the debate stage in 1984 with Walter Mondale, you know, who was chastised and talked over for being a woman, and Sarah Palin, who, you know, with McCain represented a particular kind of Republican womanhood of the Republican Party, right, that toes the conservative line around motherhood. And I wanted to include this picture with Biden because to me, this was an interaction in 2004 that was of mutual respect. And when we get to the millennium with women candidates as president and an African-American, Asian-American candidate for vice president, we see a return of misogyny in a way that I never could have imagined. After being so excited about seeing Ferraro as a kid, right? And I left this quote in from Hillary Clinton, my skin crawled in the Trump debate, and used the meme from Harris's words, I'm speaking, and this idea that women are expected as candidates to be a particular way, demure, but also intelligent, representing the issues, and at the same time, right, feminine. And I want to return to this comment that Trump made later, which was his reflection on the debate, calling Kamala Harris a monster. And I really think that so much of the way that Kamala Harris is being treated, both politically and just as a person, has to do with a history of racist misogyny towards Black women. And I think that's one of the things that we as Democrats and we as individuals invested in gender and racial equality as a matter of social justice need to keep reminding about people, is that there are these intersecting discourses of sexism and racism that are operating in the way that the right is describing Harris. And I want to get into some of these issues a little bit later. I just wanted to outline what I thought were the key points that came forward and the way that they were dodged. I appreciated the conversation about science as something that we need to believe in. And I think that's actually one of the good things that the Biden-Harris ticket has done really well, is sort of centralizing and say, we believe in science. This administration is about science, particularly in dealing with the mess that they will inherit in the aftermath of the debacle of the COVID-19 outbreak. They're contrasting opinions on China, and I think that Harris did a really good job of talking about relationships in this regard, which was very different than what Pence did. I was a little disappointed in the lack of attention to abortion because it's such a hinge issue, both for the Republican platform and the Democratic platform, but I also think the Biden-Harris ticket is kind of talking around it, rather through the packing of the court. And I mean, Harris did talk about, you know, she said at one point, a woman has a right to her body. And those were her direct words. I rewatched the tape to make sure I didn't misrepresent what she said. But especially in light of the fact that the president just got a treatment that was created through the use of fetal tissue, and his party is anti-abortion, I would have liked to have seen a more heavy conversation. The way it did get addressed was through packing the court. I found the conversation about race fascinating because it was about race and it wasn't about race. In no way did Pence attack Harris for being a Black Southeast Asian woman. Instead, he pivoted and referred to Trump's Jewish grandchildren as a way to signal racial understanding in the face of the conversation and question about Breonna Taylor's violent murder by police, which Harris spent good time on, and I think that was important. And so clearly, as we know, right, the right is invested in subterfuge around race, and Harris was invested in having a conversation about police reform and implicit bias as it was related to the Breonna Taylor murder, the murder of George Floyd, and you know, we can sort of go on with the list of all the Black folks that have been murdered at the hands of law enforcement. I think there was a good small conversation about voter rights, the economy, but what really struck me as something interesting, and I don't remember this being a part of previous VP debates, but someone can correct me if my memory is faulty, which is that the conversation was really about surrogacy. It was about being, you know, Harris defending Biden and his record as a vice president, and Pence defending Trump and his record. And I don't remember that. Maybe my memory is serving me incorrectly, but I felt like we were not really able to see the ideas of the candidates in a way that I don't recall happening before, precisely because of the polarized nature of this election and this debate and the sharp division that we see between the two parties. And so I just kind of want to put that out there because it's something that I noticed. You know, as I said, maybe my memory is faulty as I continue to age, but and have more responsibility in my life. But it struck me as being different. And so even though we got to see who Pence and Harris are as human beings, I didn't really get a sense of what their agendas are. And I know that the VP position is a subordinate position, but I think it's an interesting question to raise. in returning to this question about kind of the intersections of race and gender, racism and misogyny, Harris consistently used this line, "I will not be lectured." And I wanted to just have some fun with some of these memes that are floating around. The 12 different faces of Kamala Harris, which one are you? I think I'm number 4, but anyway, that should tell you something about me. But, she was good about getting us to think about, I mean, she said, right, if you have a pre-existing condition, they're going to come for you, right? And even though the campaign says they're committed to protecting people with pre-existing conditions, they're also suing to overturn Obamacare, as I'm sure you all know, and there's still no plan to replace it 4 years in. Here we are with nothing. So what could I say? I feel like there are 2 debate winners. One is Kamala Harris, and the other one is the fly on top of Mike Pence's head. I think that she did such a good job of trying to stick to the platform, that they actually had a platform, right, which is around healthcare, science, helping the American people recover from COVID, and police reform, which is interesting, right, because everyone on Fox has been talking about how she's flip-flopped on the environment and on her role as a hardcore prosecutor. But I think she dug her heels in, and that was the right thing to do. But I also I think one of our roles as we move forward and have these conversations is really to talk about the kind of racism and sexism that are coalescing around not just Harris, but right, the plot to kidnap and murder the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer, that are emblematic of just what the stakes are of this election. So I will stop there, and thanks for your time, and I look forward to your comments. And I should say that I really appreciate Democrats Abroad. When I was in Mexico City living there in 2008, and I depended on Democrats Abroad, so I'm really pleased to be here for that reason, because I know how vital the organization is. So thanks.
Thank you, Nicole. That is really helpful. I appreciate getting the historical perspective to some extent, and the question of surrogacy is something that we might take up during the Q&A. Now I would like to introduce Angela Fobbs. Angela is a founding member and chair of Democrats Abroad's Global Black Caucus. She's also an elected member of Democrats Abroad Germany's Executive Committee. Angela grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, where she studied finance at Xavier University. She votes in Florida and has lived in Germany since 1999. Throughout her professional career, she has worked in both the private and public sector as an IT professional and project manager, and currently teaches English part-time. Angela has an insatiable desire for knowledge and reads prolifically. She loves history, astronomy, gardening, and her family. She is committed to working for unconditional equality for all people, saving our civilization by fighting to get the governments and the people of the earth to act against climate change, and ridding the world of all the conservative policies and practices that keep humanity from making progress. Please welcome Angela Fobbs.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I think I might have to change my introduction. It's way too long. But so this debate, you know, when I watched the debate, I was really struck at how many times Pence tried to talk over Kamala. This was incredibly sexist and racist, that he believes that somehow because he's a white man that he has the right to speak whenever he wants to. And he does, just like Trump, he doesn't have to follow any debate rules. He talked over the moderator on numerous occasions and wouldn't actually stop talking. I found this incredibly disquieting, and mainly one of the main reasons is because the day before I saw a video with this guy who wrote this book about the shadow president, and that Pence believes that he is that God wants him to be the president of the United States, which is kind of frightening, really, because that's not God, that's him that wants to be the president of the United States. And he definitely, just like Trump, he doesn't admit to any culpability about what the COVID response, the fact that over 200,000 people have died. And just like Trump, he barely acknowledges it. You know, that's so many people that have died from this illness that if we had reacted properly, we wouldn't have nearly as many, that number. I think in Germany, we have less than 4,000 people that have died from COVID. And it's because we've taken proper precautions, and that the leadership in Germany has modeled the behaviors which Trump and Pence absolutely don't model. The other thing that I noticed about this event that was disturbing to me is that he kept bringing up what Joe Biden did as vice president. And I found that it's apples to oranges. You know, it's like, well, what did Joe Biden do as vice president? I mean, you can't compare the vice president position to the president, because the president has all the power. And the vice president is the person that's just carrying out the president's wishes. I found that very disturbing. But I knew this was going to be a theme, because we had a debate with Republicans overseas in Germany. That was one of the things that they kept bringing up. Like, well, Joe Biden has been in politics for 47 years and Donald Trump has only been in office for 47 months. You can't possibly compare it because it's not comparable. But you can. You can't compare it, but you can say that what Donald Trump has done in 47 months, if that's accurate, I don't know, has been really nothing positive. And the simple fact that we have a pandemic running rampant in the United States that doesn't ever seem like it's going to come to an end or even be contained is disastrous, not to mention all the children in cages, which I believe that was something that Pence, they're so interchangeable, that he just skipped over as a topic. Overall, and honestly, I didn't see The Fly until afterwards, because I was watching this. Was actually sitting where I am now in the same room. I'm in the dining room and my living room is forward, and it wasn't so clear to see because I had it on the TV. I didn't see it, but it makes sense that the dead would attract flies. Really. We can't let these people win, because they're clearly concerned with, especially Mike Pence, controlling women. And that he showed his disdain for women during that debate. I also find it interesting that whoever decided who was going to moderate this debate chose a woman to also be there. I guess I'm not sure if they chose a woman so that Pence could talk over her as the debate moderator, or that they could illustrate that he's a sexist. And with that, I will leave it to the next person.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, the interchangeable nature and the question of control of controlling women, I think those are really central points. The interchangeable nature between Trump and Pence, and of course, Pence's complacency. Thank you for that. I'm sure we'll bring those up in the queue. I hope we can bring up those questions in the Q&A as well. I think I'll go now with Erica Sklar. And to introduce Erica, she is the national community organizer for Hand in Hand, the Domestic Employers Network. Erica's organizing for justice has taken many shapes, from nonviolent direct action to the fight for environmental justice through policy change. She has worked for Representative Pramila Jayapal and the ACLU of Washington, where she tracked nearly 1,000 bills make their way through the state legislature. She sits on the board of the Coalition of Anti-Racist Whites and has just moved to Richmond, Virginia, where she has been witness to inspiring changes on the local level. Please welcome Erica.
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Darcy, so much for inviting me to be here. What an incredible crew, and thanks so much to Nicole and to Angela for your thoughts. I'm actually going to speak a little less about the debate specifically and more about what our obligation is to democracy kind of broadly, which is a question that I'm mulling over all the time, but especially during election season, I think it comes up. So I have some prepared statements just that I'll read out, but mostly I'm interested in the conversation around this. So welcome lots of thoughts and questions. You know, when we think about the word democracy, I think we often think about early lawmakers, right? Like Jefferson and this imagination of life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, you know, these guarantees that our government will function without falling into tyranny or fascism. And then suddenly we're here and we have a president who is, I think, pretty openly fascist, and our democracy is on the brink. So how did we get here? I think, and this is just my take, that for a long time, the electorate in the United States has really been pushed, I would argue, by capitalism to basically ignore politics when there's not a big election cycle, right? We go to work, we have kids, we're really busy, we have stuff to do, we need groceries, right? We're not really thinking about who's making laws. And so instead of thinking about who's making laws, we're taught that, like, oh, well, I voted, I fulfilled my obligation to democracy, I did my citizenly duty, and now that obligation is fulfilled and my work in the political sphere is finished. So when we ignore local and state politics, we watch some of our freedoms disappear, and we also watch this like fomenting in policy and beyond in community of these kinds of right-wing movements. And then suddenly Trump is elected. A big, huge wave of movement work starts. That's amazing, but it's going to take more than these 4 years of organizing, right, to get us, back to where we were 4 years ago, and then far, far beyond. So when I think about obligation to democracy, what I think about goes way beyond voting. And in fact, to me, voting, watching debates, being engaged right now is like one of the easiest things to do, right? For many people, of course, voter suppression is real and many people struggle to vote. But for other people, the people for whom, election is a major sport, election season, there's more that we could and should be doing, I think. So what are those obligations? Are we obligated, to do something when undocumented domestic workers in the United States are being harassed by their employer? Is that part of democracy? And what's our obligation to something like a failing school, that's funded by property taxes in cities where the good schools have big budgets, big PTA endowments? What's our obligation there? So as a community organizer, I think about staying engaged with politics and holding policymakers accountable belongs to us, the people, right? And it's our job to hold policymakers accountable after the election results are counted, after we've done our work to get somebody elected, and more. Organizers hold a really nimble and crucial position in democratic societies because it's our job to push policymakers to do better. And a lot of times they need us to push them, right? They often are moving a little more slowly than the communities that they represent. Sometimes they don't actually know what the people they represent want. And frankly, I also watched the debate. I was writing postcards. I'm still writing postcards. I'm always writing postcards. But I would have loved it if Senator Harris had said, yeah, I want to ban fracking. I want to ban fracking so that there are jobs in the future and we're not living in a burning wasteland, right? She didn't say that. You know, there's lots of speculation that we could do about why she didn't say that. You know, it makes sense in a way that she didn't say that, but I want her to say it. And it, you know, from your head nods, I think you do too, right? So that's why we need organizers to help connect the dots for everyone and to push policymakers to change their stances. And our work depends on really deep intersectionality, right? So what I mean by that is that we have to do our work from an anti-racist perspective. We have to be thinking about systems and people with all the many identities that we hold, right? And Senator Harris is a great example. She represents many, many things. As a Black and Asian American woman, she's faced and overcome incredible challenges in her career, right? And we appreciate that as organizers. But at the same time, as a person in a position of power as Attorney General, she did also contribute to mass incarceration in the state of California, specifically of Black and brown people, disabled folks. So I think it's important to just know that we have to hold all of these things, and we're working to dismantle those systems, those racist systems, and rebuild something that's really holding vision and transformation at the core. As we enter this final stretch of the election, we have to all consider, what is my obligation to democracy? Not just today, not just until November 3rd and beyond, if we have a contested election, but also, what am I going to do after November 3rd? What am I going to do after the inauguration? What am I going to do, you know, in the place where I live, or to talk to the people that I know, or, you know, thinking about my role as a US citizen and what I need to be bringing to democracy all the time. What are you for? And what aren't you fighting for today, next month, in 3 months? So, you know, today there's a ton of stuff that you can do, and I wouldn't let you off the hook without doing a big call to action. That's my job. I'm a good organizer. So I would encourage you right now to text and phone bank. You can use the Vote With Me app to contact everyone you know, especially in swing states. You can learn about election defense. There's tons of work you can do back end from abroad, and bring people together on the ground to support from afar. But tomorrow, by which I mean after the inauguration, your work won't be over. So it's your job to also devote yourself to what happens after this urgent moment, and think about what your long-term plan and goal is, and what you'll be holding on to, and how you'll keep fighting for democracy that grows stronger as you build demands and work with other people to grow our democracy and to live into a vision of something bigger. Thanks so much for your time. Really so appreciate it.
Thank you, Erica. I think that that's such a beautiful and important question, right? What is our obligation to democracy, and how do we see our responsibilities in relation to that? And it's a particular question for us living abroad too, for US Americans who are living abroad. And I agree. Like, I always thought of voting as just like brushing your teeth, like just something you do every day because it's good and you need to do it, right? But obviously, that is a really important question for us in Democrats Abroad, to think about how we keep our members active between election cycles, and how we see that people, you know, what does that look like for us? So I think that's a really important discussion that we need to have with our members and with the leadership, of thinking, you know, what are the issues that keep our members engaged and involved? So let's open it up for a few questions now, and then we have input from and is that okay, Anne? Can we, yeah? Let's open it up for a few questions now from members. If people have specific questions for Nicole, specific questions for Erica, specific questions for Angela, and then we'll have input from Anne and maybe Adrian as well. Oh, and great, thank you. I'm just looking at the chat box. Great, so who has their hand up, or who would like to ask a question of our presenters? Miriam. Yeah, maybe people can raise their hands, because I think I can see that better. So Miriam, the floor is yours.
Well, I was very grateful that Nicole brought up the issue of surrogacy. it touched me also in a couple of ways. I was also, as Erica just said, when Kamala Harris had to take back her own position on fracking or on the Green New Deal, I found it very painful. And I think it has to do with the surrogacy issue. I mean, it's an ironic situation. She's on the one hand auditioning to be a future president, and at the same time she has to express positions of another person, as if he were the arbiter of what they as a team are representing. So I had very mixed feelings about that. I think, you know, I think she's an amazing woman in many ways, but she has her past, but she was clearly given her marching orders in terms of what she could and could not say or should not say. And so I just wanted to comment on that really, and just say that I was very glad that surrogacy was particularly identified as an important issue. I don't know if it's a question, but certainly I'm happy to bring it up as a comment and to continue the discussion about it.
Thank you, Vicky. Would anyone like to piggyback onto that, or any comments from our presenters in relation to those questions?
I just think, you know, I saw, did anyone see the interview with Pete Buttigieg on Fox News yesterday? You should, it was the most fierce I've ever, and queer I've ever seen Pete Buttigieg be, which I was excited about. But it was interesting because what he said, he was the Pence stand-in as Harris was preparing for the debate. And what he very saucily said was that Harris had to find some daylight between her position and Biden's position. And in some ways, I feel like we didn't get to see the Kamala Harris that we're used to seeing, which is that intense prosecutorial, you know, fiercely invested in the environment, but also, as Erica said, responsible for incarcerating many, many people of color. That person was not there last night. And I think that's what's interesting about the way that these two VP candidates are functioning right now. It's deferral to the president, which is the structure of leadership for sure, right? But the daylight is so small, and it was weird hearing, but Harris didn't say, I support fracking. She said, Joe Biden will not end fracking. So if we flip it, is she really saying, I mean, she's representing Joe Biden as a surrogate. She's saying Joe Biden will not ban fracking. But if we take it the other way, I kind of feel like I want to give her a little bit more room, because that position that she's in, it's just historically, like who she is, that's not easy, right? Especially with these, you know, racist, sexist, homophobes that are in office. You know, pardon me, I'm just gonna say what I see. But yeah, the daylight is so small, and I think, you know, the Buttigieg interview is just entertaining if you want to look it up. But that daylight is so slim, and I think that's what we saw. And it doesn't let Harris off the hook for all the things that she's done previously, but it's not the person we've come to know in being on the ticket with Biden, which is about deferral. And Pence is doing the same thing, kind of.
If I can add to that, maybe just picking up on you know, what can we do about what's our obligation to democracy? I think our obligation in one way is also to say it's not two men who are running against each other. It's a team of very competent people who are running against each other, and that Joe Biden, to his credit, picked a very strong woman, not just a woman of color, but a strong woman to be at his side. And I think that speaks for him, but it means that they should be represented as a team and not as she as his like under whatever assistant, secretary, whatever.
Could I add to that? You know, especially about the fracking and other things where she was there to represent Joe Biden's positions. I mean, I didn't expect anything else but her to represent his positions. The media and Trump and Pence and all these other Republicans want to make Kamala out to be some kind of, I don't know, anarchist or something.
Progressive.
Yeah, yes, progressive. Oh my God, that's so scary, you know? And what they thought somehow, I think, is that they could goad her into, like, I don't know, reacting in a stereotypically Black way, you know, like they've seen on a TV show from the 70s or something. They underestimated her confidence and her professionalism and her politicness, you know, that she knows what her role is. Her role is to support Joe Biden, and that whatever her beliefs are not important. But I thought that's the feeling that I got from that whole thing, that they were trying to goad her, you know, what about fracking? What about this? What about, you know, come on, you know, you want to say something, you know, it's like, actually not. I mean, she was pretty calm and even tempered through the whole thing, because she knew, just like everyone watching, that this wasn't about her. It was about how she portrayed Biden's policies. Yeah.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think, I mean, man, what I wouldn't give to see Kamala Harris just eviscerate Mike Pence, as we all know she could do easily, and you know, wasn't able to because of political decorum. And I think the thing, like the place where I go, is like, wouldn't it be nice if we could have an honest presidential debate where people were actually saying things, right? Like that's like the systems thinker in me, is like, how can we make this different and better so that people could really represent themselves and not have to say what somebody else says, you know? But yes, totally agree with you, with both of you.
Thank you. Kristen, you have a comment?
Yes, first of all, sorry for my baby if that was distracting anybody earlier. She was being very, very active. I guess, first of all, how satisfying was it when she would say to Mike Pence, "I'm speaking," because I don't know about everybody else, but I just was like, yes, exactly. Excuse me, I'm speaking. That felt very satisfying to me. But the thing that frustrated me was the discussion about abortion. And she let him get away with things like saying abortion at the end of the term, which there is no such thing as an end of term abortion. And I just feel like my frustration level is that we let conservatives really dictate how this conversation happens. And every time they make a statement like that, they're pulling the center a little bit further to the conservative side. And so we're not arguing with them about like, no, that's not a real thing, don't be silly. We're letting them dance around it and say these things, and we're letting these things go unchallenged, and people hear this and they think, oh, people are having abortions at the end of their pregnancy. Why would you have an abortion at the end of your pregnancy? That's called having a baby. It frustrates me to no end. And I feel like in this period of time when abortion is at its highest risk of being criminalized again in the United States, that we need the Democrats to really stand up. And I think it was a real missed opportunity for her to really stand up. I know she said, I believe in a woman's right to choose, and it's a woman's body and she has her own choice. But that, for me, wasn't strong enough. I think we need to turn this on its head and say, why don't you believe that women are capable of making their own choices? What's wrong with you that you don't trust women to make their own choices? So that's just my thoughts.
That would be very interesting. And I think that is a really important question of like thinking about the structure of this and how it's set up to produce a certain type of result. And I'm thinking now, I would like to introduce Anne Hess as well now to bring you into the fold, because it doesn't look like we have our other speaker. And so now it's odd that we need to bring you in too. So let me introduce Anne. Anne chairs the DA Global Women's Caucus and also serves as DA Global Caucus Coordinator. She's a San Francisco Bay Area native and a musician by trade. She's lived in Germany for over 20 years, where she raised 2 daughters and now teaches at the University of Stuttgart. She is also a former chair of the DA Germany Stuttgart chapter. So welcome, Anne, and we welcome your comments.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have a lot to say, and I'm so excited by what Kristen just said, because I've just been having this conversation about framing of the reproductive rights conversation. And to Erica's point, when she said, what are you going to do after the election? Well, I have some good ideas on that, because we have a reproductive justice action team. And exactly what Kristen was saying is really important to me. I'm reading a book right now called Framing, where whether you're selling cornflakes or women's reproductive rights, how you say things is so important. And it is exactly right that we're, in my opinion, we're not using the proper language. So one of the things I'd like our action team to do, Kristen, maybe you could be part of this conversation, is to discuss this with our members, with women, and develop better ways to talk about this ridiculous suggestion of partial birth abortion. What they call it, partial birth abortion, and all of these ridiculous concepts that don't even, it's not even a reality. But anyway, that's important to me. But I did want to talk about a famous San Franciscan, or I should say from Oakland, but we got to know Kamala pretty well in California, in San Francisco especially, and in her framework, in her time frame, that when she was working as DA in San Francisco, she was considered extremely progressive. And I know her record, but in the context of what was going on in the United States at the time, she was very powerful for women. She started that task force for young women who were involved in prostitution. She stopped prosecuting young women criminally for being victims of trafficking. So that was really huge in those days, in that time. But to speak about the debate, if I may, for a moment. So we'll put this reproductive rights whole thing on hold, because it's going to be a major issue after the election. And I have so much more I'd like to say on that later on. We'll do some meetings and webinars and all of that. But my feeling for Kamala, for Senator Harris, is that job one for her was to do this incredibly delicate balance that we all know, every woman who's in a leadership position knows, to appear capable and strong without appearing angry. And we all remember how they went after Michelle Obama like crazy as being this angry woman, angry Black woman, and all of that, when she expressed some of her frustration with what it was like being a Black woman in the United States. It isn't fair, it's not okay, it's not right, but as I think some of you mentioned, it's part of the chess game of this political game, and we've got to win the chess game, and that I think everybody understands. That's the most important thing. It's also why she didn't go too far into the abortion issue, I believe. But I think she succeeded in doing this delicate balance. She looked right into the camera, she smiled, she made personal contact with the people in their living rooms around the country, and that was important at that moment. She could have been much more aggressive, as we know. We've seen her, remember crybaby Kavanaugh, we know what she can do. She's already proven that she can be a strong prosecutor, and she didn't need to prove that, I don't think. She needed to prove that she can be calm and strong at the same time, and I think she really did that. So that was job one for her, and I think she did that beautifully well. I think, as one of you mentioned, the expectations for her were extremely high going in, and I think a lot of people didn't realize that Mike Pence is a slimy right-wing talk radio host like Rush Limbaugh, and you know, he's pretty good at twisting the truth, and he's not bad at debate either. And so I was a little worried that she would fall short, but she didn't. Pence used his typical evasive techniques of jumping to his own talking points instead of answering a question. I think the most audacious thing he did was to use Daniel Moynihan's own famous quote about you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts. How dare he use that quote and then proceed to make up his own facts after that? You know, typical, but what a jerk. I mean, really. Many of you have mentioned what was to me my favorite quote of hers was, "I'm speaking." We all know what that is about, every single one of us. And I think that resonated with women around the country. Also, I thought what was a really important soundbite that she came out with, which I think we'll hear all over and over again, is you respect the American people when you tell them the truth. After all the lies we've heard for 4 years, I think that one is going to end up being very important to hear over and over and over again. But the one that actually, the comment that she made that actually almost brought tears to my eyes because it's so true and it's so sad is when she asked everybody, again, she looked straight into the camera and said, can you imagine if you knew in January what they knew? Yeah, what they knew in January, but we didn't find out until March. If we had known that, how we would have prepared. What might you have done to prepare? At a personal level, the family preparation, as a community or the state, the country as a whole, and in fact, the whole world would have been better prepared. And it was because of them and their incompetence that it didn't happen. So I think that's another successful soundbite that we should keep repeating, that people again, in living rooms around the country need to understand. I think they did. But it looked to me like the points that she chose to hammer home, and there were so many important points, but the ones that she really hammered on were the COVID response and healthcare. She goes again, another good one. They're coming for you. They're coming for you, she says. And I think that's especially, you know, undecided people who aren't sure. I can't imagine how anybody can be undecided at this point, but there really are people like that. I think that bringing that home, hammering that home to them was important. And yes, I felt exactly like the rest of you did about the Green New Deal. I would have loved for her to defend it as an economic winner. She allowed Pence to talk about, he said it's going to crush, what he called an economy crusher. And I would have loved for her to be more assertive of that and step out in front and be proud of the fact that she was an advocate for the Green New Deal and really sell that as a booming economy kind of a thing, which it's going to be. Renewable energy and all that. It's going to be a big job maker, job creator. I think she didn't do that because of the swing states, these sensitive swing states like Pennsylvania, where fossil fuel is still a thing. And again, it's back to that really careful chess game, the chess game of winning this election. And so I hope, again, back to Erica's comments about doing something after the election, that's something that all of us can stand up and make a lot of noise about afterwards and make sure that they don't backtrack on that. That's one of those things that I want to do. So those are my comments. Those are my thoughts on the whole thing. I think she succeeded in creating some sound bites, some comments that will be really, really useful and really important in the coming weeks. And yeah, so I'm really proud of our San Francisco girl, as you can probably tell. That's all I have to say about it.
Thank you, Anne. That's really helpful. And I think that the point around Pence, you know, his complicity, that was the word I was trying to think of. And there's an op-ed in the New York Times today. It's something like, what makes Mike Pence's complicity so chilling? And that's something that I was thinking a lot in watching how incredibly poised and smart and capable Senator Harris is. And then just seeing these outright lies, it's just, it's stunning and chilling. So thank you for your comments. And we can now, I think, can you hear an echo when I speak? No, I was just hearing echo, good. Do we have more questions for our presenters? Peter Butterfield, please speak.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to give my view on Kamala's role in this debate. She probably acted as a surrogate for Joe Biden, and I think she did it very well. But I fully expect her, when Joe and Kamala are the new president and vice president after January, I fully expect Kamala Harris to assert herself, as I think Joe Biden expects her to, and be a governing team, and then her policy viewpoints will actually show through and affect what the team does to govern the country. And I very much look forward to that. I don't consider her a real progressive, but she certainly is much more than Joe Biden, and that excites me. And we'll have someone in the White House that that is going to push some of those ideas. And I really wish them luck, and I'm excited about it.
Thank you, Peter. And Kristen, is your hand up? Is that, let me see.
I think that was me.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to comment too. One thing that struck me about the debate was it was very clear to me who Kamala Harris especially was speaking to, in that she was very guarded about issues that would be seen as more progressive, from environmental issues to abortion rights. And it also, what I found really almost amusing was how Pence made a better case for why I wanted to vote for Biden and Harris than Harris did. Because he went on and on and on about how they believe in climate change and support the Green New Deal and want to do something about climate change and don't like fracking. And I was just like, right on, I'm with them. And of course, Harris was not doing that. She was being much more guarded and, sort of, yes, we believe in climate change. These are the actions we want to do, but it's not like the extreme. I mean, Pence was trying to portray this as these extraordinarily extreme and over-the-top policy positions, and she was trying to walk him back on that and portray the more moderate positions that the Biden-Harris ticket has espoused. But you could really tell, that they were going much more towards these remaining very centrist and even conservative undecided voters. And obviously not trying to convince more progressive voters who I think have all been convinced already that they should support the Biden-Harris ticket. I was less clear on who exactly Pence thought that he'd win over with those talking points.
Vance, you have your hand up?
Yeah. So I have a rather provocative question for all of our panelists. And the question is, do you think that potentially and hopefully this will be the last election where we actually have to talk about a candidate being a woman or a candidate being a Black or a minority candidate, that in the future we can just talk about one candidate versus another candidate and not have to get into the ethnicities of it?
Can I just jump in there? Oh, go ahead, Ann.
That reminds me of the answer that Ruth Bader Ginsburg gave when asked how many women are enough on the Supreme Court. And she said, well, when all of them are women, that will be enough. I'm afraid, I would like to say that this is the end of the conversation, but I'm really afraid that it's another whole generation that's going to have to fight this battle, because it's not just in politics, it's not just how many women senators, how many women presidents have there been, it's in how many women CEOs, how many women business leaders, how many women everything really. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was right. When all of them are women, then that will be enough. But I think it's a long, hard slog ahead. What do you think, Angela?
I think that it would take, let's just say, by the time Kamala runs for president, we'll still be going through this. I don't see how it will end all of a sudden, especially since we never actually do anything to end racism or sexism. We don't actually take any steps to teach people different or persuade them to think differently, or, you know, we've never done anything to stop sexism or racism. And I don't mean that we don't have laws in place or things like this, but we've never actually tried to, you know, sell it to the populace. I don't know. Okay, I'm old. So when I was a kid, that they had these commercials about Smokey the Bear and forest fires, you know, and there's a whole bunch of people who are like, yep, I'm not going to start a fire in the forest because there was a commercial that said don't do it, or littering, don't litter because it's bad. Like, we've never actually tried that with racism or sexism. We just hope, you know, that men won't rape women, men won't try to use their power to have sex with women at work because there's laws and there's a fine or you could get fired. But it doesn't actually, the laws don't actually, they stop it for some people, the people that probably wouldn't have been racist or sexist or homophobic in the first place. And for the people that don't care, like, for example, the president, Donald Trump. I think we all remember his famous line, which I will not repeat, but it's how some people think, and there's nothing that ever stopped a guy like that, you know? I mean, so until we can do something to change how people are thinking, I think it'll always be there.
Stacy?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Erica. Stacy
If
had
I
her
can
hand
just-
up, but
okay.
please.
If I can just add one more comment to that, which is, I agree, and I think identity is important, and I don't think we should have elections where the identity of the people who are running is not taken into account in any way. I think that, you know, considering who people are and how their identities are formed, and the, you know, the various things that they have to contend with as human beings, with all of what that entails, like, you know, with strong agreement that we should not be racist or misogynistic or ableist or ageist, I do think that talking about people's identities matters. And it matters because representation is important, and representation matters. And that's, you know, a big part of why people are so excited to have Kamala on the ticket, I think.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I'm not talking about identifying the candidate. I'm talking about having to explain for a candidate and say, well, because she's a woman, or because she's ethnic or whatever. And I'm hoping that someday the identity is what becomes important, and their positions is what becomes important, and that we don't have to actually discuss the details that make them who they are.
Stacy, was your comment connected to that, or did you have?
It was, yeah. I wanted to go back to what Anne was saying about reframing, and how women are constantly in the passive voice in the way that we talk about women in the United States and around the world, that it's violence against women instead of men beating women, or that it's, you know, women, you know, everything is against us, and it's not placing the blame on the other side of the people that are committing the murder or committing the violence or committing the rape or whatever it is. And I think that when we talk about candidates, it's not any different. And I think that reframing the language that we use to talk about our issues or us as people, I think will go a long way towards that. And we just need to change the way that we speak, and change the conversations that we're having, and change the focus onto where the blame is, or where the focus should really be, instead of having women be passive, or having people of color or anything being a passive voice in this. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, judging by the nodding heads, I think a lot of people agree with your idea. And I think, yeah, Anne and raise this idea of reframing the language. And I also think, that it's really wonderful, our differences as well, right? I mean, I think so many times when we're on this defensive of having to fight for representation, and because so often, because of sexism, because of misogyny, because of racism, because of white supremacy, because of homophobia, because of these very deadly ideologies, actually, it does, they can be very scary conversations to have. But I also think it is wonderful to remember, or to remind ourselves of just how these things that make us human, the people we love, the people who raised us, the religions we practice, our human diversity is really exquisite and extraordinarily wonderful, and something that brings us together too. And it's easy to forget that sometimes when we're not the ones who are framing the debate, for example. So I just wanted to raise that aspect of it too, because I think in this Erica, you're a long-standing community organizer, and all of our amazing volunteers and Democrats Abroad have been working so hard to get out the vote and to answer voting questions and to help people get their ballots in. And we also need to think about how we're caring for ourselves and how we are reframing the work for ourselves as well. And I like to remind myself of why I do the work, and the people that I love, and why it's worthwhile. So we have a good amount of time. I just found each one of your presentations, or the input that you all had, so rich, and so many different things to think about in relation to Senator Harris's. I love that moment in the debate too, where she said, she was about to say, the moderator was about to say, or she did say Kamala. And then she said, "Oh, Senator Harris," and Senator Harris said, you can call me Kamala." But I love that generosity in that moment. So the comments that you've made about Senator Harris's debate performance, and then how it connects to our work, I feel like there's so many different things that we could discuss. I wonder if there's somebody who hasn't spoken yet that might like to speak. Just making sure that all of the members and people who are on the call have a chance to ask a question to the presenters, or to simply make a comment about anything that's come up for you in this discussion. You're very welcome to do so.
Just see this question in the chat. What kind of community organizing is necessary for Dems Abroad? I'm so curious what other people think about that. I have some preliminary thoughts, but I'm curious what other folks have done and are doing, and how, what kind of work there is to do.
I was just going to say, when Darcy and I were discussing the format for this meeting earlier, and she said there was going to be an organizer on, when she explained what you do, Erica, that is one of the things that I'm really excited to hear. I know that some of our DA people on this call have been involved for years, but I really only got involved after Trump was elected. So I've never been involved when we aren't gearing up for a huge fight. It was, all right, it's midterms, all right, it's presidential election time, let's go. And so I don't know what we do when we aren't gearing up for this fight. So I'm really interested to know what our more experienced volunteers have found and what someone with an outsider's perspective might think.
Well, one thing I'll say is I think that's on purpose, Liz, that you know, organizations, big organizations especially, have an interest, and you know, capitalism has an interest, and the government as it is, the status quo, has an interest in people fighting electoral battles, right? Instead of policy battles, instead of, you know, things that are going to take a long time to undo, like systemic racism in the United States, like mass incarceration, right? Like these big, like ending the use of fossil fuels. Those are like, you know, 50, 60, 100, 400 year long battles, right? That we're fighting. Those have nothing to do with election cycles, right? Because like we get who we get in these roles, and they pass policy, and the policy is good. But, you know, as Angela was saying, we haven't really changed all that much. We've changed a lot in certain ways, but we still see a ton of oppression of people of color in the United States, right? You know, disability rights is another example. The Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990, right? So there is, you know, there's an interest in upholding the status quo from institutions. And so what we're doing on the ground, that's why organizers have to exist, right? To sort of say like electoral politics is important, and we all spend this fall like pushing to get the right people elected. And we have 400-year battles going on, and we need you in January too. You know what I mean?
Can I add to something that Erica said? One of the things that we do when there's not a panic election is regroup, like what Erica said. And there's the gearing up for election time. And now, you know, if all goes well on January 20th, then what we're going to be doing is pivoting to our action teams. And each of our caucus leaders has teams that work on things. We have a reproductive justice action team. We have a women and climate action team that really has to gear up on January 21st. I think as I said, the reproductive justice team is gearing up. I want to form a team. It's in formation, still in my head, about violence against women and what we can do about that as an action team. And that is the way my caucus is organized, in little action teams, little pods, and they have their own meetings, their own agenda. I'm a member of every team, and I go from place to place, but I want to empower these women in each group, experts in each field, to do their own research and their own actions, calls to action, and so forth. So after January is a really good time for a phone call with me and say, I think that I want to do this or that. That's when we really, as a caucus, spring into action and do and work on the issues that we were created for. It's not just always about the election and more blue votes. So I think I probably am speaking for Martha and her caucus too, and Angela, that this is kind of the exciting part for us as caucus leaders, because we get to work on our own important issues and not just sending everybody to vote from abroad, if you know what I mean. So everybody have my number.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you for this. And now I have three people. Vicky has her hand up, and then Christina, and then Kristen.
So one of the things that I noticed as we're talking to each other, that Democrats abroad seem to have a particularly progressive sense of politics, and it's very, I love that. I'm very happy to be embedded in such a community here in Switzerland, but I think it's perhaps internationally as well. But one of the things that strikes me, and I wonder if we couldn't unify around this as well, it seems to be another issue, Liz, that maybe some of us need to work on. It's one I've taken on for myself, in addition to all the other ones that have been mentioned already, and that is the antiquated election system in the United States. I just feel, you know, what we're dealing with is so regressive and so outdated and so, you know, I can't hear it anymore, that the founding fathers and what they wanted, that is so irrelevant to today's world and to the world that many of us are living in abroad. And I would like to see Democrats abroad leading the charge on this issue. And I certainly want to make a commitment to it, in addition to all the other intersectionality issues that we've been talking about that are so important.
Christina?
Yeah, as a long-term volunteer, you hear me? Yeah, as a long-term volunteer, I think I can add to that conversation. Many of us got in for the same reason, you know, when something goes bad. I got deeply involved when Bush got elected because it irritated me. So, but I mean, we are constantly doing things. I mean, if it weren't for Democrats abroad, none of us would even have the, and Falco, I can say Falco, the Federation of American Women's Club, they were the ones who really pushed for citizens abroad being allowed to vote. So we wouldn't have even had that. So we're constantly working on citizens' rights, you know, and now we have the resident-based taxation and the tax force team. We're working on all of those kinds of issues, citizens' rights issues. We're also working constantly on voting rights. So just because there's not an election doesn't mean our job goes away. Far from it. Once every 2 years, we go to DC and we door knock, for those of you who haven't been so heavily involved. And we talk to the legislatures about these problems. And also, one of the big problems that Democrats in general have ignored are all the small legislative branch that we should be paying much more attention to. So we can be focusing there on in the off seasons to these gigantic important elections. And that's basically in general what I had to say. And yeah, I think that Democrats abroad has many faces and does a lot for Americans abroad in general. So our job doesn't go away at all.
Thank you. Kristen?
I wanted to comment on that question as well, as someone who has been involved in Democrats abroad for quite a while now, pretty much the entire time I've lived abroad, which is over a decade. I think that, you know, the elections and the work we do to get out the vote and to help Americans who live abroad realize their right to vote is very important. But the work we do helping Americans who live abroad exercise their voice between election cycles is just as important, whether it's helping represent them on issues that impact us in particular as Americans living abroad, like voting rights issues, like the various taxation issues we face. There are issues related to adoption for Americans who live abroad, or same-sex partnerships that with children and non-biological children that are really important ones that the different caucuses focus on, and that Democrats abroad has played a very important role in advocating for the rights of Americans who live abroad on many issues that impact us directly because we live abroad, but also the issues that we care about regardless of where we live, whether climate issues, racial justice issues, the importance of education, the importance of voting rights reforms within the US for US-based voters. You know, exercising our voice on these issues and helping Americans who live abroad exercise their voice, I think that's an important role for us. And another thing is that we live in very mobile communities as Americans who live abroad. And there are constantly people moving in and out that just don't know how things work. And making sure that we're present for people so they know that we're there to turn to when they have questions, when they have trouble reaching out to their elected representatives, when they don't know how it is that they're supposed to vote when an election comes up. You know, the more active and visible we are in off seasons, the easier our job is in an election year to actually help people vote, because they know we're there. They're already part of our networks. They are already part of our teams. So I think that as well is a really important role that we play in this sort of off-cycle years, is just being there and being present. You know, even if it's just for a picnic on the 4th of July, so that people know we're there to turn to when they have questions, when they have concerns.
Great, thank you for that. I also think that, I mean, this is maybe more of a general issue for US Americans who are living abroad. I just noticed that, like, in some of the chat rooms, for example, there's just not a lot of knowledge about how change happens. And so I think maybe some of the issues around organizing or community organizing, or the work that happens in the years between elections, comes from that observation, that from the observation that I've had, that I think that's kind of the only thing that for a lot of you, I mean, as we know, I guess the majority of US Americans living abroad don't vote. And so then I just think it's an important thing that we're also educating one another about how political change happens, you know, how rights are protected, and that it is something that goes beyond simply elections, as important as elections are. And I think that's the way that's something that I resonate with in relation to what Erica said, for example. And I think that's just a broader discussion, or something that I've been thinking about a lot personally, because before living abroad, I was very active in local politics and community organizing. And then living abroad, what does that look like for me? You know, how am I, what is my responsibility to democracy outside of the obvious, which is voting? And I guess that's kind of my conundrum personally. But I agree with you that, of course, there are a lot of extremely important services that Democrats abroad is providing. And I love the idea of the caucuses. And I think that there, you know, it's a matter of really helping our members to see how they can plug into those caucuses, and how they can bring their ideas around very particular issues to the caucus. Because one thing that kept me from getting involved with Democrats abroad when I very first moved to Europe was that I had this sense that kind of the only thing that they were interested in was tax reform issues. And that was my very first initial thing. It's like, okay, well, yeah, that's an important issue. But I didn't realize immediately that there were all these different caucuses, and that there were people working on a variety of issues. So I guess that's just also a reminder for myself that that's something that we can be doing as a leadership team in the Zurich chapter, so that our members know. Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, I'll second that, Liz. It's something that a lot of people, especially living in Switzerland, do care quite a lot about.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that it's not important. I mean, obviously, once again, it's like we need to be receptive to the issues that our members have. But yeah, it's not like my burning issue either. Martha, you're here from a really important caucus. Would you like to add anything that you haven't? I know I was in conversation with you a little bit over email, and you were so kind to co-host. The LGBTQ plus caucus was so kind to co-host with us. Is there anything that you would like to add, or anything that you would like to share?
Yeah, sure. I was actually just about to put my hand up. You know, one thing we haven't talked about much tonight is about the Senate. You know, we talk about elections, we talk about president, we talk about vice president, and we talk about the policies that we want to see happen. But the route to those policies is through winning the Senate. And, you know, I know Democrats abroad is a lot about elections, because we're part of the Democratic Party, and that's our job every couple of years, and sometimes in between, is to make sure that we win elections. But I hope that that's also really front and foremost for people, that if we can win the Senate back, that is going to make an enormous difference in terms of all of the issues that we're talking about. And the second thing I wanted to say, is so interesting to hear people talk about policy and whether, you know, between elections, that's, you know, can we do stuff within Democrats Abroad? Because I think, you know, for me, Democrats Abroad was really just a platform that I brought my issue to. I was working around expanding immigration rights in the United States to include partners of same-sex couples. And, you know, that was all stuff that I did outside of Democrats Abroad, but Democrats Abroad is really a vehicle where we can really accelerate a lot of our issues and bring them to the attention of a much wider audience. And I think also bring our issues back in all kinds of ways in the United States, because Democrats Abroad was one of the first organizations to pass a resolution in favor of including same-sex partners and our families in immigration law in the United States. And the city of San Francisco then copy and pasted. You know, they took over a lot of the text that we had done in our resolution a few years later and passed that similar resolution. So I think we really are a constituency of people who see a lot of things through a different lens because of where we live abroad, and we have different issues that we face. One of the ones that our caucus faces right now is that children born to same-sex couples who live abroad, married couples, are being excluded from citizenship, which is pretty egregious and unfair. And so it's something that we're able to work on from abroad because that's one of our issues. But of course, it also, you know, affects families who live in the States who've had their children born abroad and who this particular administration is really targeting for really unfair treatment of families. And so I think those are all yeah, of course, we're really engaged and focused on the election right now, but those are all really important things that we can impact as Americans abroad, you know, through our own activism, whether that's inside or outside Democrats Abroad, but certainly using Democrats Abroad as a, you know, as a vehicle to get attention for our issues. So those are just my thoughts, and I'm really glad to be here tonight. And I would just encourage everybody to look and see where you can make a difference. In terms of the Senate, because I think we're so clear, like all of us could list the swing states, right? We all know what the swing states are. You know, if we're on a bus somewhere and we hear somebody say Ohio, you know, I'm all over them. You know, we're all helping all those people to make sure we get all those ballots in Florida. But, you know, the Secretary of State race in Montana, or, you know, these critical Senate races are all really important as well.
Thank you. Those are really super helpful comments. Erica, did you have your hands up?
I didn't. I was just going to add something about policy specifically, which is, you know, the policy that you all write or that gets passed or that's like happening in smaller locations, cities and towns, so often becomes national policy, right? Like the bills, the domestic worker bills of rights that we work on in different states and cities become the same policy or very similar policy that can get passed on a federal level. So when you're writing resolutions and thinking about what policy can look like, know that the impact there is huge. So, you know, even if it's something that feels like, you know, the impact here is a limited number of people, you don't know where it's going to go. And I think that's, you know, such a crucial piece of organizing is that vision for like what could happen with some of those things.
Yeah, that's such important history too. I really didn't know about that, Martha, in relation to immigrant rights and same-sex couples and the legislature that was, yeah, I didn't know about Democrats Abroad's involvement in that. So that's a really important piece of history that I'm happy I know a little bit more about. So it is now, we just have 4 more minutes before the end of our event tonight. And I want to thank everyone again for being here and thank our wonderful presenters for their inputs. And Erica's here from the States. Everyone else I think is from different parts of Europe, but Erica is dialing in from Richmond. And I'm just thinking about next steps. I mean, I know how to get a hold of everyone here. I think people know how to get a hold of us. And we're discussing, you know, Stacy and Britt and I had thought that we would do a debate download for all of the debates. I don't know. We'll have to reassess that if we still want to do a debate download for the next presidential debate, if there is one.
Yeah, I was just going to say there might not even be one.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that was another reason why this particular debate download felt so important, to gather together and to share ideas and to encourage one another in this last push toward November 3rd and then beyond. So, yeah, I want to thank everyone again for coming. And if there's any last comments that anyone would like to make, you're very welcome to do so.
I'd also like to say thank you to Angela and Erica and Nicole and Martha and Anne, everybody who joined us from all over the place, as well as our members here in Switzerland. And thank you so much. This was such, I mean, even though the debate, you know, didn't have quite the insane impact of the Trump one, I think that just from a historic perspective, it was really important. And I am really happy that all of you could join us here tonight to talk about it, because I need to talk about it. I love it. Thank you.
And thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure to be here. Really appreciate being with all of you today.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes,
Thank
thanks
you.
for inviting
Thank you,
me
Vance. Thank you, Liz. Thanks to all
I
of our
didn't do
wonderful
anything.
volunteers. Yes, you did.
I really did about nothing for this event, which was nice. But I was going to say thank you to the Zurich team for putting this together and finding our great experts. And thanks to our experts for joining us, even though some have already left. And thanks to the members for joining in. I think this was a great dialogue. And I know I have some things to think about for not November 4th, Jamie. I'm taking a day off at least, but for after the election.
My family needs me too.
You all are more optimistic than me if you think that we'll be able to take a day off by November 4th.
Angela and I are going to be in the election night waiting room starting at, what did you say, Angela? Like 1 o'clock in the morning, our time, CET, thinking
No,
that
it's 7. It's 7, not 1. I'm sleeping at 1 o'clock in the morning. There's no point to stay up.
No.
I mean, it's at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's only 7 on the East Coast. The polls are not closed. So
Well, some of them are.
But Miriam is right. It's going to be a long, long wait, won't it?
Yeah, it's not, I know it's not, we won't know the day after, but there won't be work we can still be doing right then for the election. There's not election work, but we'll have media, I'm sure, asking us what we think.
Yeah.
I hope not. I just want to invite everybody to the waiting room. It's a place that'll be there until we have a decisive winner. So feel free to swing on by, have a conversation, maybe watch a little news or chat with other people. It's like a low stress, you don't have to do anything if you don't want to. It's all there for us all. So enjoy.
I think that'll be an important resource.
Yeah, that's perfect. I'm so glad you're doing that. I know we'll definitely be stopping by.
You have mental health crisis counselors on standby.
That is kind of what we're there for. Like, so if it gets a little weird, we can all talk about like, oh my God, and, like maybe make each other feel better or talk about something else or, really definitely swing on by the waiting room. It'll be there until we win. So
Might not be that bad. It might come sooner than we think, everybody.
Yeah,
I hope so.
True.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so, Anne.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.